So, good morning from me as well. My name is Uli Klümper from TU Dresden, and it's my great pleasure to co-host this session. And with that said, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Yarina Yo. She's from McGill University here, and she's an early career researcher who's going to talk about exposure to and burden of foodborne pathogens with antimicrobial resistant properties.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yarina Yu from McGill University, and today I will present our research on estimates of human exposure to antimicrobial resistant bacteria and the resulting burden of illness. So let's get started. So in Canada, antimicrobial resistance is a critical medical and economic concern. So as mentioned in presentation on the first day, antimicrobial bacteria are responsible for more than 14,000 deaths annually in Canada, and responsible for about $1.4 billion in healthcare costs. So foodborne pathogens such as Campylobacter and Salmonella are major contributors to hospitalizations and deaths in Canada. So despite this significance, the research on the economic impact of AMR strains of specific foodborne pathogens in Canada is insufficient, so we aim to fill this research gap. Antimicrobial use is a major driver of antimicrobial resistance. So increased AMU is directly correlated with increased AMR levels. And the agriculture sector responsible for about 82% of the total antimicrobial usage in Canada, and primarily administered antimicrobials to livestock through feed, water, or injections. And therefore, controlling AMU is essential to manage AMR levels. The Public Health Agency of Canada is developing the integrated assessment model for AMR, known as IAM-AMR model. And this model aims to understand AMR transmission along the food chain and inform mitigation strategies. But currently, this model doesn't include any assessment of burden of illness or benefits and costs. So our revised model aims to address this limitation and enhancing its utility for policymaking by considering both health and economic impacts. So for more information about this model, please go to next session. In session 9, PHAC will bring more insights about this model. So in this presentation, I will focus on the first research question, examines the annual and lifetime added burden of illness for humans due to exposure to resistant foodborne bacteria, and specifically we're focusing on Salmonella and Campylobacter infections. So we aim to estimate the annual incidence numbers of infections caused by resistant bacteria and assess the quality-adjusted life years quality lost to understand the impact on the quality of life, and also we analyze both the direct healthcare costs and indirect productivity lost costs associated with these infections. So the second question will be addressed in the future research. And we choose to use Markov model to analyze the health outcomes of individuals. Markov models can be thought of as journey maps for health, and showing how individuals transition between different health states over time. So in our model, we divide health situations into different health states. So for example, such as healthy, sick, recovered, or died. And each health state is associated with different health utilities and costs based on its impact on person's life. So we then determine the transition probabilities, which are the chances of moving from one health state to another. And we use Monte Carlo simulation to simulate the model and predict outcomes for Canadian population. So firstly, we constructed an annual Markov model using a monthly cycle length to track the progression of salmonella infections, distinguishing between AMR strains and the susceptible strains. And this model assesses 3 outcomes, including case numbers, costs, and qualities. And we ran this model for 5 years, from 2015 to 2019. And this model incorporates 8 different health states. So as you can see from the graph, initially patients are categorized based on their severity of diarrhea, either complicated or uncomplicated. And they may then transition into either self-treatment or physician treatment, with some cases require hospitalization. And finally, the model accounts for 3 final outcomes: fully recovered, long-term health effects known as sequela or DICE. So each health state in our model is assigned a utility value and associated costs. The table on the left side includes several cost categories. So for instance, if patients visit physician, they may incur physician fee and laboratory test cost and treatment cost. So if they miss work during their illness, there will be a cost associated with labor productivity. Additionally, if hospitalization is required, the cost associated with hospital stay will also be considered. So given the chronic nature of AMR infections, our model spans a lifetime horizon of 100 years to capture the long-term chronic sequela costs with an annual cycle length. So similar to the annual model, this lifetime model begins with individuals infected with either AMR strains and susceptible strains. And from the initial state, individuals can transition into long-term sequela, such as IBS and RA, and patients can also transition to recovery state or over time progress to death. And we developed a similar model for Campylobacter infections, which include different complications and sequelas. But this model follows the same structure as previous models, and we evaluate different transition probabilities and costs associated with Campylobacter infection. So our model used 3 main types of data inputs, and the most important one is transition probabilities. So transition probabilities captures the likelihood of moving from one health state to another within a specified time frame. And we sourced the data from FoodNet Canada, CPARS, NESP to obtain the transition probabilities for Canadian population. And also, health utility values represent the quality of health in each health state. So we used the published paper to find the health utility values and the associated costs in Canada. So our results show the annual cases for total salmonella infection peaked in 2016 with approximately 120,000 cases in that year, and gradually decreased to 98,000 cases by 2019. And this decline reflects the implementation of new measures to reduce salmonella in frozen raw breaded chicken products starting in 2019 in Canada. Yeah, the left side graph shows the probability of different outcomes over 100 years and showing the long-term effects of salmonella infection. In terms of economic impacts, as measured by the total costs, we can see the peak, the most cost also was happening in 2016 at over $194 million before decreasing in 2019. And this reduction correlates with the decline in number of cases and indicating the effective management for the disease over time. The red set graph shows the cumulative cost of chronic AMR salmonella and susceptible salmonella over years. The purple line represents the cumulative cost of AMR, and the blue line indicates cost associated with susceptible strains. So notably, the cumulative cost of AMR salmonella are higher, reflecting the additional resources required for treating AMR infections. From a quality perspective, infections caused by AMR strains constantly showed higher per case impact compared with susceptible strains, and emphasizing the long-term health effects of resistant infections. And both lines in this graph follow similar trends. So it shows a rapid increase in quality lost during the first few decades, and followed by a decrease in the later years. And this pattern suggests that the majority of the quality impact occur in the early stages and started to stabilize over years. So in conclusion, our findings indicate that the cumulative cost of AMR is higher than that of susceptible strains, and with the cost gap increasing over time. And this trend implies the growing economic burden by AMR, and similar results was obtained for Campylobacter infections, which shows comparable patterns, and it further highlights the broader impact of AMR on public health and economic systems. So our analysis shows that effective interventions have led to reduction in annual costs and quality lost to AMR. And for the future directions, it is important to enhance the surveillance data by expanding the follow-up of patients and access on patient medical records, and improve the reporting system to reduce the under-reporting issue. And also we will complete our analysis and compare with these results with related papers. So additional research is needed to evaluate the economic impact of AMR on healthcare systems, and to identify the most cost-efficient strategies for interventions. Yeah. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the contributions of our collaborators, and this research was funded by Genome Quebec, McGill University, and the Public Health Agency of Canada. Thank you for your patience, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hello, my name is Jan Siemens from Germany, Gießen. I was searching the error bars in your model results. So can you assign an uncertainty to your estimates?
Yes, there is definitely have uncertainty in our model. So we use the Monte Carlo simulation to account for the uncertainty in our model. So by running the simulation thousands of times, we could estimate the distribution of outcomes rather than a single deterministic result. So this process involved random sampling of transition probabilities and the costs with their respective ranges. So we used the beta distribution for transition probabilities and for utility values, and we used the gamma distribution for costs. So I think it would include the uncertainty in our model. Yeah.
Which is Lucas Goodman from Virginia Tech, and he's going to talk about how action plans are translated into policy and how that's done differently across different countries. Lucas, enjoy.
Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Luke Goodman, and today I'll be talking with you all about AMR National Action Plan goals translating into federal policies, specifically a comparative analysis looking at the United States and Canada. The urgency of AMR necessitates both global and national political action. If action is not taken, we are looking at cumulative global cost of $137 trillion Canadian by 2050. And there's also significant economic burdens today for the United States and Canada. Due to the global nature of AMR, there's substantial need for international alignment and strong implementation efforts. Left unchecked, AMR will pose considerable threats both to health and economic security, as well as degrade the effectiveness of antimicrobial agents. In 2013, the World Health Organization released a call to action, urging member nations to develop their own national action plans in accordance with the soon-to-be-developed Global Action Plan. The U.S. responded via executive order by Barack Obama in 2014, creating the Presidential Advisory Council for Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria. In 2015, they published their first national action plan, succeeded by another in 2020. Canada was not short behind, establishing their first national action plan in 2017 and 2023. Both countries have made great strides by developing these national action plans. However, these plans must be translated into federal policies to be truly effective. Therefore, our study aims to understand just how these national action plans, or the national action plan goals, are implemented. We chose to compare the US and Canada because of their geographic proximity, strong economic and social ties, as well as similarities across both their economic, government, and healthcare sectors. We started by categorizing national action plan goals into thematic areas. We then used databases, the databases of Parliament of Canada's Legisinfo and the US's Congress.gov, to systematically search for approved, failed, and proposed legislation using the keywords shown. Finally, we performed a content analysis on each approved and pending bill to assess alignment with National Action Plan goals. Now, diving into our results, focusing initially on the themes from the National Action Plans, there's quite a bit of alignment between the United States and Canada. Both countries explicitly include goals that address infection prevention and control, strengthening surveillance efforts, development and innovation of diagnostic tools, the research and development of new antibiotics, therapeutics, and vaccines, as well as international leadership, collaboration, and capacity. Canada also explicitly mentions stewardship as one of their goals. Meanwhile, the United States doesn't have it explicitly as a goal, but they do mention it quite frequently within their action plan. And in a similar capacity, both countries include environmental dimensions of AMR, but do not have it as an explicit goal. Now, shifting gears more towards the legislative and regulatory policies, this table indicates the presence or absence of these policies in accordance with National Action Plan goals. I'll dive into these in a bit more detail in the coming slides, but the main takeaways from this table are that Canada has proposed legislation for AMR prevention and control, as well as implemented regulations for surveillance efforts, as well as AMR stewardship. While the United States has policies for prevention, research and development of new antibiotics, stewardship, as well as environmental dimensions of AMR research funding. Since our study was exclusively focused on the US and Canada, international leadership was beyond our scope. However, this has been covered by other studies in recent years. Now, diving in more narrowly, focusing on Canada specifically, in 2012, the Public Health Agency of Canada required AMR surveillance for accreditation of inpatient care clinics. And this has substantially increased AMR stewardship programs and led to systematic AMR data tracking and reporting. AMR Network is a federal program that catalogs different surveillance programs across clinical and veterinary sectors. These data are then published in summary reports and used to inform policy interventions. As of 2023, it is currently only in select provinces, but with plans of expanding across the country in coming years. Lastly, the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act is a proposed piece of legislation brought forth in 2020, specifically or largely to prepare for future pandemics. Its primary focus is on COVID response through the creation of a federal advisory committee. However, the advisory committee would also provide measures to reduce the risk of threats posed by AMR. Now, narrowing in on the United States, the U.S. has taken a stronger legislative approach that allows for the establishment of AMR regulatory frameworks. Since 2008, 5 bills have become law. Some example of AMR-specific statutes for prevention and control include allowing antimicrobials or novel antimicrobials to be used for dire need populations. And for research and development, an example includes market-based incentives. And then shifting towards stewardship, they've implemented legislation that focuses on oversight of antibiotic use, particularly in the veterinary area, but also somewhat in human medicine. And then from a research perspective, from an environmental perspective, they've implemented legislation that increases research and education grants focusing on the movement of antibiotic-resistant bacteria from groundwater to surface water sources. So while Canada and national action plans are well aligned, there's some key differences when it comes to policy implementation and mechanisms. Canada has taken a more regulatory approach, and in doing so, they've been able to integrate a semi-national systemic surveillance network. These efforts have also significantly increased AMR stewardship programs, particularly in the healthcare setting. Meanwhile, the United States stewardship laws have primarily focused on non-medically essential use of antibiotics and animal growth production. The U.S. has been more aggressive with its research and development initiatives, particularly on new antimicrobials, as well as AMR legislation focused on prevention and control. However, the latter could shift if Canada decides to enact the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act. Canada has also yet to pass any AMR legislation, and they've only actually introduced 2 AMR bills. Their strategy so far has largely been reliant on regulations and voluntary initiatives. So I'd like to leave you all with some key takeaways focused on areas of opportunities for policy interventions. So first and foremost, our study highlights the need for both countries to incorporate environmental dimensions of AMR, both into their national action plans as well as through federal policies. There's a lack of diagnostic or policies surrounding diagnostic development, and neither country has passed AMR-specific legislation. Instead, both countries have incorporated it as a smaller part of many different bills, but it has never been the primary focus. The figure and table shown below compares the United States and Canada's efforts to address AMR against the rest of the world, and they are adapted from a study by Patel et al. In 2023. Globally, the US and Canada rank relatively high for AMR governance, with Canada at a rank of 29 out of 114 countries, and the United States second. The scores below it are out of 100, and they highlight that there is still significant need for improvement in national AMR governance, particularly in the realm of policy intervention. With that being said, I would like to acknowledge a few different people that have helped me a lot with this study. First and foremost being Dr. Amy Pruden, as well as my advisor, Dr. Todd Schenk, as well as our lab as a whole. I'd also like to acknowledge the Virginia Tech SIPCAR graduate student and faculty community, as they have been incredibly helpful in preparing and supporting me for this presentation and my research as a whole. And lastly, I'd like to thank the National Science Foundation for funding this work. Thank you all. Thank you all very much, and I'll gladly take any questions.
So you said that there's certain aspects where one country has done something while the other has not. Is there a history kind of like that we can expect that stuff will be copied because it has worked in the other country?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would expect so, at least. And I say that because that's often how it has worked, at least from the National Action Plan standpoint. Oftentimes, as one country develops their plan, another one uses it as a model. And most countries are republishing national action plans on a 5-year period. And so it kind of creates an actual competition, in a sense, for nations to be more proactive when addressing antimicrobial resistance. But from more of a policy standpoint on a national level, I think the same applies to a certain extent, but there is a lot of key differences just simply in government structures that can make it somewhat more difficult. But again, I think the WHO in establishing and really urging the national action plans and then the countries establishing them themselves and continuing to put them out really helps hold national governments accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica Donna from Australia, CRC Safe. I guess I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you, and very useful update for me. I'm active in implementing Australia's National Action Plan and work obviously mostly in the environment space. And I guess I just wanted to make a comment on the importance of the voluntary action, and you mentioned it. And I think what I see missing a lot is just us as a research community getting our voice heard and making those advances. But EDAR itself is almost a voluntary action. It's had huge impact, and I can see that as someone that came in, relatively halfway through this series. But, the amount of advice that's come out, seeing what is coming through with UNEP and the quadripartite, their voices are being heard, but we can do a lot more as a network and a community. In Australia, our water industry, for example, have moved ahead of the government because they know that they can see that it is a risk for them. They need to do something. And so you have voluntary action leading to later, eventually we'll see regulation probably. So I guess I just wanted to make a comment on how important we all are in making sure there is voluntary action. And thanks for your talk.
Thank you. I would agree wholeheartedly, and I'm really glad you actually brought that up because as someone who currently this summer I'm working to actually in the policy space as a scientific advisor, and I will say my one piece of advice for everyone in this room as scientists is that the people who make policies oftentimes, whether it be statewide, national level, the people who write the physical text in the policies often aren't the actual legislators themselves. They're staffers and think tanks. So I think as a community, the most important thing that we can do when publishing papers or writing or communicating in a writing sense is to be clear and direct and concise in what we're saying and have very clear policy recommendations. Because I can tell you from firsthand experience, oftentimes what goes into these bills is staffers who aren't super well versed in the science control effing and searching through tons of documents and information from esteemed colleagues like yourself to figure out what exactly we should do on policies. So that is my one piece of advice. Very clear policy recommendations. Make it easier for the people that are actually writing the policy work. And that's coming from someone with an engineering background who loves data and numbers too. So
Excellent.
Yeah.
Our next speaker, Rebekah Riddle from Virginia Tech in United States.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to tell you about a serious game my colleagues and I have developed titled Combating the Spread of Antimicrobial Resistance and how we can use serious games to stimulate policy deliberations. Serious games have been around for forever, but the term was coined by Clark Apt in the 1970s.
I really like this definition from the European Association of Distance Learning, which says that serious games are a solution that uses game mechanics and game technology for more than entertainment. Serious games are typically a product, not a process, so they can be published and used for many different audiences. Serious games are designed to stimulate higher order thinking, and this can be things like critical thinking, problem solving, and comprehensive integration of knowledge and topics. And serious games can address nearly every level of Fink's taxonomy of significant learning, which is a common education taxonomy that maps levels of learning in a hierarchy order. So foundational knowledge through integration, is normally like the cornerstone for serious games. But due to the immersive nature of serious games, we can also include human dimension and caring through the development of different ideals, different values, and learning about oneself and others. Some of the prior applications, there's only been a few games developed in the AMR space, but some of the relevant audiences are health professional and medical students, which are typically running through simulations of surgery, or they have educational games that will help with proper sanitation and hygiene. Furthermore, there are also K-12 or grade level students and the general public, which typically have games that are designed for awareness about the issue. But there is a gap in these games that are currently on the market that they don't focus on, and that is the audience of grad students, researchers, faculty, or government employees. They don't have a policy focus, and they don't explore dimensions outside of human health or basic awareness. So this is where our serious game comes in. We are the representatives of the working group for the hypothetical presidential task force for combating antibiotic resistance. And some of the main objectives of the game are to develop recommendations that will be included in the National Action Plan. Keep in mind that this is all hypothetical. This is a RPG game, so think D&D for the nerds out there. And there are no binary decisions in this game. So this game can be the policies can either be included in the National Action Plan, pushed for voluntary measure, not included at all, or there can be packages or formulations that stakeholders will agree on. There are 4 key issues that are talked about in our game, and these were primarily chosen on the basis of the World Health Organization's call to action and their causes of AMR list, as well as some of the game developers' expertise. Those 4 are antibiotic production, wastewater surveillance, antibiotic use for gross promotion, and antibiotic production for humans and healthcare provider education. Most of these issues have a direct environmental impact that are associated with them, except for issue 4. But oftentimes, issue 4 is used during package formulation, so it does have an environmental connection during the game, which is actually pretty fascinating. One thing to note here is that the game was originally based in the United States right at the time of the call to action, and places the US as having done very little about the issue, but future iterations of this game will be done to ensure that it's a little bit more culturally inclusive. It'll be placed in a fictitious land. There are 8 different stakeholders in the game, which are 3 federal organizations, 2 trade associations, and 3 NGOs. And each of these stakeholders have their own opinions, values, and preferred outcomes of the game, and participants will be placed into the shoes of these stakeholders and asked to play as if they are one of the members of these working groups. And they have 3 game materials that'll help them out in this game. The first one is general instructions, which provides a general overview of some of the issues that will be going on and some possible outcomes. The second one is a technical report, which contains all of the up-to-date scientific information that they can use during the policy deliberation process. And then the third one is confidential instructions, which are letters written by the respective organizations that also contain some confidential scientific information that can also be used during that process. One thing to note is that the eighth organization is the Human Health Organization, which is the chair, and that one has all of the information to keep the meeting organized and moving along in an appropriate manner. So we had about 30 science and engineering graduates and faculty at Virginia Tech for our first pilot game. And we used 3 different data collection methods. The first one is a pre and post survey design format using Likert scale and open-ended questions. This one sought to compare 6 learning objectives, which could be categorized as a role of science in policy deliberations and the role of stakeholder in policy deliberations. We also used observations to focus on the dynamics of the table and how they came to these issues. And we used focus groups to bring all of the gaming groups back together and have whole group discussions on what happened to the game and provide some lessons learned and connections that they can have on their day-to-day life. So moving into the Likert questions, we found that there were significant results using the Wilcoxian matched pairs test on questions 5 and 6, which asked participants, how much do you think stakeholders' interest, values, and priorities guide discussions around AMR, and how much they should? And we found out that there was an increase before the game versus after the game in how much people thought that they do guide it, and a little bit less on how much stakeholders' values, interest, and priorities should guide these issues. While not significant at the 0.05 level, we did find that this was significant at the 0.01 level, which is pretty common for things like pilot studies. We saw that their question number 7 was significant, which has to do with skill development, particularly synthesization, communication, and deliberation. The perceived skill on a scale of 1, not at all agreeing to this comment, to very not agreeing to this comment, went from 3.47 to 3.84. And when asked directly on a 5-point scale of the strongly disagree to strongly agree, we saw that there was a average comment of about 4.6, which meant that most of the players strongly agreed that this game helped them with communication and deliberation skills. There was a little bit of surprise during the game about how scientific information was used. And when we asked them what the most important thing they learned from the game and debrief was, we found that a lot of people commented that the deliberation is more than scientific information, citing things like personal views, personalities, and communication styles as can shape deliberation. And they also talked about how technical information is extremely powerful and how it could be used to cherry pick to support a particular issue, or how it could be, the numbers could be contorted. We also ran a thematic analysis on this question, and an overwhelming third of the responses talked about how working with different perspectives and understanding different perspectives can really help when managing a larger problem like AMR. Many responses also talked about how hard it was to negotiate and deliberate about these issues, and they felt like they learned a lot about how policy deliberations can be conducted. When we asked them what made learning through serious game different from how you would otherwise learn, about a third of the responses said that the role-playing method was really unique and helped them grasp the information and points of the game a little bit more effectively. And the players also mentioned that they felt like the serious game was more engaging than other teaching methods, and specifically that it was better than reading, which I found pretty interesting. Some of the key takeaways, though, that throughout this process has been that serious games can effectively educate participants about policy deliberations on AMR. I mean, AMR is super multifaceted, and it's hard to capture that when we're reading. So serious games can really help with that, especially if it's a role-playing style game. Furthermore, implementing serious games into curricula can bridge the gap between STEM and policy, which can encourage transdisciplinary collaboration. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm Mary Shane from Solar Environmental. I'm wondering if you thought about proposing this as a workshop for this conference.
Okay, well, funny story about that is that this was actually a workshop for this conference, but not enough people signed up, so it unfortunately had to be canceled. But next year, maybe, if there's popular demand, I can bring it back.
Thanks for the nice talk. I'm Gilbert Osena from University of Gothenburg. What is the average time of playing this game?
The average time of playing the game? It's roughly 4 hours from start to finish, but that is including focus group and deliberations. The deliberation time takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours.
And the deliberation time, they are supposed to read the technical document?
So reading the game materials will take about 30 minutes. Then there's introductions and like just general deliberation before you start to form packages. None of that is included in the actual deliberations time, in both informal and formal. And then the focus group will take about an hour. So altogether it's about 4 hours, but deliberation time where you're sitting down and really ripping apart these issues and using these technical documents and things is about 2 hours.
Thank you.
I just had a comment. My name's Tony Poole. I'm from the USDA in Texas, College Station, Texas. This seems like it might be a good way to combat anti-vaxxers or, policies like that. I don't know how you would do a widespread implementation, but
yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you. Also, shameless plug. Thank you so much for setting me up for this. Shameless plug, if you guys think that this would be great for your organization, please let me know. I'm happy to facilitate this this game for you guys. But one of the reasons why it is talking about antibiotics, not antimicrobials, is to allow for a more general audience to be included, because when you say antibiotics, people go, oh yeah, I know what that means. But when you say antimicrobials, people are like, what? So it was specifically developed to have a little bit further reaching, and then has been narrowed down a little bit since to talk more about scientific experts.
I think we can do with one more question over there.
Hi, I'm Carrie Hamilton from Arizona State University. I think this is really cool, and I was wondering if you incorporated elements of, decision science or game theory into that material for the participants, and if you looked at, or had plans to look at different combinations of decision-making priorities that might lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, we definitely did incorporate game theory and decision science into the development of this, specifically during the second and third iteration of this game. And we developed the technical documents specifically to have some potentially misleading science to see if there would be people who would cherry pick this or would pull this specifically to help themselves. We also definitely had confidential information, so somebody that was a pharmaceutical representative would be like, oh no, we don't need to worry about wastewater surveillance for pharma. Look at all this great data that we have that's technically not available to anybody else but me. So we specifically included this to pull apart the decision making for this.